Welcome to the Market Me podcast with your host, Mike Mall. Each episode of Market Me deconstructs real campaigns for actual businesses to improve their marketing efforts. Mike is the founder of Social Media House and a digital marketing consultant who teaches marketing strategy to executives and their teams from small business to Fortune 500 companies. Let's get started.
So in this episode, we're speaking with Lloyd Yip of LWY Consulting. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Man, I'm really happy to be here. It's going to be fun to have a conversation about sales and marketing growth.
Yeah, so a funny way of coming across you and your brand was that you guys got featured in a newsletter from AppSumo.
Yeah.
Of like I don't know if you submitted it or if they just came across and they were talking about the top like subject lines to get people to open emails and stuff. And how did you get involved with that?
Like, I don't even know. My content's been just, I suppose, shot everywhere in the internet now, and whether or not I know that it's there or I don't. I mean, I think that's the power of content marketing, though. I firmly believe that if you're really trying to build a long-term business for yourself, you can't not invest in building a brand and building thought leadership, because although it is a bit more of a long-term strategy, it's a long tail. You can't expect it to deliver results overnight, but it's exponential. And I find that the more you invest in it, the more that it proliferates and almost takes on a life of its own at some point. And it's crazy because I definitely was one of those people that got frustrated in the early days that it wasn't giving me immediate results, but just reminded myself that like this is a long-term game. And then, it really does take on a life of its own. And now it's probably the biggest generator for business. In 2020 for sure. There's no doubt. There's no comparison in terms of what's getting me the most revenue.
Got it. Absolutely. Actually, funny enough, I just spoke at their remote work series last week. So that was pretty cool. What I've been finding, and I don't know, do you do a lot of speaking or a little bit of speaking?
No one's speaking anymore these days. That's for sure. Like true. Summits. And I think it's pretty interesting that the state of the world and the state of work as we know it has probably changed. I think for the better, though. I think now that people are getting a taste of what it's like to work from home and they're needing to do it, everyone's, for the most part, adopting it, whether or not they want to. And it's going to be a couple months. I mean, for anyone who's like listening to this far into the future, right now, it's like April 13th or something like that. Yeah. Cut this and edit if I messed up the date. But we're obviously right in the thick of the COVID crisis. And like people are needing to, through hell or high water, adapt some work from home policies. And 4 months down the line, 5 months down the line, when they realize that like, hey, we were just as productive here, like excluding the first 3 weeks when everyone's freaking out.
Yeah.
But excluding those couple of weeks, everyone was like doing great. And work as we know it after normal life comes back is going to be like, you know what? I want to work from home. And every company is just going to have to adopt it. So I think in the same way, people are going to start innovating the event space, which has traditionally been very much in person. And they're going to realize we still want to have that connection with everyone, but we can't do it in person. Let's try out all of these like virtual summits. And I've already seen it happening. And they're going to realize, you know what, like this is pretty cool. I'm getting almost as much impact out of this, but now I don't need to fly to a different city and all this stuff. Yeah. So in the sense, like I am doing speaking stuff, but just virtually these days. Yeah.
I've been making a habit. So like I get advertised them on my Instagram feed just constantly because I'm in that marketing bucket. And so instead of signing up, I just like automatically just find out who it is. And I reach out. I'm like, hey, do you need speakers? And I've been able to get myself some spots because like, I don't have a lot of people like directly reaching me, but I'm like, I might as well do my own outreach, see what happens.
That's what it's all about. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, then every time I see an ad, I'm like, I'm going to invite myself to speak at this thing and see what they say. Most times they say no, but
why not? I mean, what's a no?
Yeah.
There's really no downside to getting a no.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit about the business.
Yeah. So I suppose to describe my business, it's best to even go back in time and talk about what led to me doing what I do now to give some context. So I began my career in SaaS. So I was doing enterprise sales and I learned what the process was to actually sell really high ticket, really expensive multi-year contracts to big companies. It's an interesting process. There's a lot of stereotypes that are attached to salespeople, I suppose, if you're just, some random person who's thinking about their career options. But the salesperson stereotype is so inaccurate when you're talking about like expensive solution enterprise selling, because really when you're talking about selling expensive stuff, it's way more consultative. You're almost being more of like a consultant and an advisor than you are just like a car salesman, if you will. And I loved it. I love that art of being able to communicate value, of being able to almost deconstruct the problems that people had in their organizations and come up with a customized solution that they could then take and embed and get a ton of ROI out of. And that was kind of like my hook, because from there, becoming someone who was fluent in the art of sales, I realized this is what I wanted to do. And I spent a couple of years with that SaaS company, got a lot of success, made some good money, sold a lot of deals, but I wanted to also craft my own path and carve my own niche out. So I joined after that initial company, a really, really early stage startup. And we were just like a bunch of dudes. We were all like alumni from the same school. And we're building like a brand new company from scratch, pretty much out of the living room. And we scaled that from like $0 to $2.5 million in 18 months. And I was like leading a lot of the revenue, a lot of the sales, a lot of the marketing stuff. So that was really, really interesting. But the challenge for that company, and that company, what we did was we sold like a sales technology, and it was primarily for the top of the funnel. And the challenge was we would have all of these customers coming in and we would try to help them fix their top of the funnel problems. But inevitably what would happen is even if we did fix their top of the funnel problems, they wouldn't know how to like close the deals because they just had no process. We would get them a couple leads and then they would just either not follow up with them, or they would follow up and not follow up in the right way. They just didn't really have an infrastructure which was conducive to getting clients to move all the way through the funnel. So what I realized was like, lead generation is really important. And I became very good at that working at that company because that's what we focused on. But then I also learned about all the stuff in the first company about sales process and closing deals and building like an actual funnel flow that pretty much no SMB companies knew how to do. So that's why I left. I began my own consultancy where I could both advise on the lead generation stuff, which I became very fluent in, but also add the advisory service to help people actually build a sales process, which could take just like a lead, but bring them all the way through the rest of the funnel. So this is more of like a full service sales and marketing advisory service, where if you're struggling with figuring out your positioning and your messaging or your lead generation, or all the way to how do you even close a deal, what processes do you need to get someone to actually raise their hand and give you the money, right, all the way through the client acquisition engine. That's pretty much what we do at LWI Consulting. We're not selling like a SaaS product, because I always found that like to make a SaaS product super robust to cover the entire funnel, you almost have to be like a HubSpot or a Salesforce where it's like a massive suite of tools. Whereas for me, I can touch every part of the process because I'm doing advisory work and I work hand in hand, one-on-one with my CEOs and with the founders that I spend time with. And I really get them to pretty much implement those areas themselves. So that was like a very long-winded, explanation of what I do, but I thought that the background, gives context as to why I do what I do.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the majority of the people that listen, they appreciate the backstory because they can see parallels in what they're doing, or if I'm here, where can I move to, or where else can I go with what I'm doing? So, it does make sense to explore. So that's great. So, do you primarily work? It seems like it's kind of like if you work with consultants individually, or SaaS. Do you have one or the other that drives the majority of your business, or is it kind of spread out evenly?
Pretty even. Like primarily my audience, they're B2B business owners. So if you're running like a SaaS business, that's great. Like come from a SaaS background. If you're a consultant and you're running like a B2B type of consulting offer, that's cool. That's literally what I do now. So I understand that space quite well. If you're an agency, that's cool too. Like an agency and a consultancy has a pretty similar client acquisition engine anyways. So really my preference is if you're selling something B2B, that's a little bit higher ticket. That's pretty much where I play around in, because frankly, when it comes to the client acquisition processes and the tools and the channels that you're utilizing, if you're above a certain like ACV, so like average customer value, and you're B2B, you're pretty much going to be doing the same things or some variation of those same things. So that's pretty much what I focus on as far as my ideal client profile.
Awesome. And then, so are you taking it like end to end in terms of like helping create proposals and helping create web copy? Is it kind of like full spectrum, or it depends on the needs of each person?
Yeah, and it's super customized. It's super customized to what my clients need. Some of them are almost like pre-product market fit and they don't even have revenue yet. So we spend a lot of time of defining like who their audience is, what channel should they be utilizing, what is their copy, what is their positioning. And then once we really figure that out, we then of course go to market. We test out some of the channels. We test out which messaging works and what doesn't. We get feedback. If the feedback is positive, then we just double down and we try to get some more customers. But if it's not good, we iterate and we improve the positioning before going back and testing it out again. But then some people will come to me and they're way farther ahead. They have like a sales team and they need to refine their sales process. Maybe their closing rate's really poor, or they're not generating enough leads to feed all their reps. So it's like a totally different structure when I work with those folks compared to say someone who's pre-product market fit, right? So it definitely depends on the project.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I'd love to talk to you about like the marketing landscape as a whole. I know, with the COVID stuff, it's kind of gotten a little bit funny, but I think there's a lot of interest and I'm seeing a shift because we're competitors in some context because I have a lot of executives come to me and say, I want to be out of this. I want to now take this path in life and drive into the consulting space. And I do a little bit of work there, but they always come and they ask, and I'm curious about your perspective. I have mine as well, of course, but the best marketing channels. Yeah. And I think it's obviously a combination of stuff. I mean, content marketing. I'm really big on podcasts more than anything, just because of the ability to chop it up in so many different ways and layer it into my funnel. But I know like webinars are big and there's a lot of different ways of doing it. How do you kind of strategize it? How do you think about that kind of stuff? Yeah,
that's a huge question. And I hate to give you a cop-out answer, but it depends. But I stand by that. And I'll tell you why. Because the usage of a particular channel or a particular tactic totally depends on what the resources are at the availability of that business owner. If you're a business owner who understands their product market fit to a T and they have a ton of customers and they have a great reputation and they have a ton of cash flow, it makes sense to do certain things. Whereas if you're talking about a brand new business owner that has minimal capital, probably doesn't even really understand what their business is like meant for yet, there's certain things that you can't do. So that's kind of why I say it depends. So I can give you a couple channels, but I can tell you in what situations each of those channels make the most sense in. Okay. So let's actually just go to the beginning. Let's talk about someone who's, say, relatively early on. Maybe they have a couple clients. Maybe their cash flow situation isn't great because they're bootstrapped. It's a story that, frankly, we've heard many times before, right? So if we're talking about someone like that, realistically, what's the best thing that they can do is build a really robust outbound engine. Because if we talk about outbound, it's great because it's like very quick to impact. If we're talking about impact as in like getting a demo or getting a sales call, frankly, you talk to someone, they agree to a demo, they jump on a phone call, you close them. If we're really simplifying it, that's kind of how easy it can potentially be. Like you can do that in one day, right? You can write someone an email, send it, and have them respond and book the time in the calendar in one day. So I would say outbound is probably the best thing to do because it's low risk, low barriers of entry, low cost, and quick time to value, which is kind of perfect if you're brand new and you're a little bit of a newbie. Now, outbound is kind of broad. Like, what does that really mean? So then you also have to follow one of the biggest rules of sales and marketing, which is like go where your audience spends time. Because outbound can be done on email, it can be done on LinkedIn, it can be done on Instagram, really. So if you're selling to, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an audience that would definitely be on Instagram. Musicians, maybe? I don't really know. I don't sell to musicians. Maybe musicians are on LinkedIn. If someone in the podcast is a musician who hangs out on LinkedIn, let me know because I have no idea. But let's say you're selling, sorry? I don't think so. In fact, it's funny. There's actually like, when we started doing a lot more like using Sales Navigator to like kind of chart a course about who we're going to target, there's a lot of industries that like completely neglect LinkedIn still. For sure. For sure. Like, interestingly enough, and you would never expect this because these people are, I mean, they almost have to be techie, but like e-commerce, like people who are running Shopify stores or Amazon FBAs, are not on LinkedIn as much as you would think, but then like dentists are on LinkedIn. So I'm consistently surprised by the people that have been brought into the LinkedIn ecosystem. There's 500 million people now, but regardless, understand who your audience is and then go to where they are to do your outbound. Because outbound, although each channel has their own like unique way of communication. So email and LinkedIn and Facebook, you can technically do outbound on all of these, but the way in which you message and the way in which you have conversations there are different. But still, you choose the channel which they actually are spending time in. So if you're going after like SaaS companies, as I do, LinkedIn is massive because that's where they spend time. But if you're going after, like let's say you're a brand and you want to get like influencers to do influencer marketing. Yeah. So like Instagram's kind of your spot, right? So that's what I would say. If you're early on and you don't have too much cash flow, you don't want to have like too long of a duration before the results hit you, and you want to be able to have like a low risk point of entry into the market, outbound's kind of perfect. And then you pick your channel based off of where you think your selected audience actually spends time. So that's like outbound. And that's kind of like, what I would say makes a lot of sense. But outbound does scale though. So as you get more mature, if you do have capital, it's not that you don't do it anymore. It's just that you do it differently, meaning you add automation, you add scale to it, you add tools that would potentially get you in front of more people. You add a sales team, because sometimes people don't love automation because you get volume, but you sacrifice personalization and humanness, I suppose. So if you really don't want to sacrifice it and you don't think that automation can get you close enough to that really human feel, then as a big company, you have the resources to hire people that can allow you to bring that humanity back into your outbound, and outbound works. I would say though, if you're selling something really inexpensive, probably outbound is a harder thing to scale. I normally would say if you're literally having someone who's like manually making emails or manually DMing people, your offering better be at least like a couple $1,000s, or else you just can't make the unit economics work. It just doesn't make any sense. So in that note, we move on to the next entrepreneur who, let's say, is a little bit like they're also relatively early-ish, but their pricing is super low. So in that case, it's kind of a crappy situation to be in, because my feeling is that if you're selling that lower price product in the beginning, you're still going to have to like hustle your ass off to like do outbound, because frankly, you don't have too much capital to play around. But if you really want proper scale, you got to invest heavily into content and SEO, because that long tail is going to eventually bring people into your ecosystem, which is really important, because at a lower pricing point, you need to almost have like volume, right? More than anything else. So paid ads would work really well, although you need to muster up the capital somewhere. Partnerships could work pretty well as well, but you also have to take the time to invest in those partnerships, because people aren't going to work with you. People aren't going to promote your content. People aren't going to do co-marketing webinars with you unless you have a little bit of credibility. So I would say in the beginning, you almost just have to bite the bullet and know in advance, because you're selling something a little bit lower ticket, that it's going to take a little bit longer for you to get that traction. That is unless you're getting funding. If you have funding, it makes things a lot easier. So, I mean, I'm painting that kind of as a crappy picture. So that's why generally I don't advise people to begin their first business at a low ticket. Sure. Like begin with a higher ticket offering, because it's easier for you to scale, even with like the simplest channel, which is outbound marketing, like just pretty much DMing people or sending people emails. You can actually get to a pretty solid and sustainable revenue per month just by doing outbound. Whereas with like a lower ticket, it's really painful to even get your first 10K MRR without like having some sort of funding. That being said, regardless of which like pricing you're at, let's say you're expensive or let's say you're low ticket, once you do have capital because you have like a really steady client base, the world opens up, because that does allow you to afford like paid acquisition at scale. Like people who just drop $20 per day into paid acquisition, they're not going to get great results, because you really do need to have enough spend for Facebook to like really allow you to optimize what ad sets even work in the first place. So when you have capital, which comes from obviously like getting just really scrappy in the beginning and getting your first couple clients in, then you can invest, drive more traffic into your website. And this is really where the content comes into play, because people always say, oh yeah, create a ton of content. And content is great, but what you don't want to do is end up just creating content for the sake of creating content. Like we've all been there, where we spent so much energy on creating this webinar or this podcast or this blog post, and we release it into the world, but no one ever sees it. And it's like, man, what the hell? Right? And it really sucks. Not only does it suck in the sense that like we spent all this energy to make it and no one's seeing it, but we also like put our heart and soul into it a lot of the time. And we want people to see how amazing it is. We want to add value, but if no one sees it, then it's just not that helpful. So that's why I think content done in parallel with paid acquisition is much better than just like beginning with content alone with no real strategy for people to see it. That's why, once again, Outbound in the beginning is best, because it's super free or super cheap and you can immediately just get the message to people. And then once you do have people going to your website, once you do have a little bit of reputation, once you've built up that foundation doing outbound, then you have the capital, which you can drive people to your content, right?
Yep.
Having content distribution and content creation together, that's a real content strategy that can drive ROI. Just content creation by itself doesn't really do much. And then obviously content distribution without content creation doesn't even make any sense. So right. I would say that's kind of like my approach. Organic first, organic like outbound, and then content plus paid together for scale in the future after you have some of those resources.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating how many businesses I've spoken with that are just like, oh, well, we have a blog. I'm like, and that's the end of the conversation. It's like, yeah, the chances of any of this ranking at any point in the near future, there's no attention put to it. It's really strange that they think they can build it and they will come mentality. It's
like crossing fingers.
Yeah.
It's like, I would love to just show up at a bar and have like the girls that I found attractive just like come up to me, but that's never happened in my life. Like I have to proactively go and talk to them. That's just how it is. And as a marketer, as a salesperson, as an entrepreneur, this idea of you build it and they will come, like it's ridiculous. You build a website. Yeah, no, they're not going to come. You create a blog post. No, they're not going to come. You have a call to action on your website or on your social media that says book a demo. No, they're still not going to come. Like you have to proactively push your message to them, whether that be in the beginning, just like outbound and emailing them or DMing them like, hey, I exist, raising your hands, I exist. Or eventually paying and pushing that content to people, because once again, how else are they going to find it? And then like the more advanced stuff, of course, is partnerships where like you and I, we're working on a podcast right now. You have an audience, I have an audience. And then working with you, I now get exposed to your audience. And that's how this content that I'm part of gets distributed. And in the same way, I'll be sharing this to my audience. And then now they're going to know who you are. So at the end of the day, the content by itself is just your content. But there needs to be like a distribution strategy. There needs to be a way that you're getting the message to the right people, or else what's the point of all of this, right? It might as well just sit on a bookshelf, chilling by itself and collecting dust. So yeah, like I completely agree. It's got to be, there's got to be a purpose and an intention and a strategy when you're building stuff.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people they have an expectation of people will see it, and I think far too many people read about and hear about inbound, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll just get inbound. Like from where? There's no awareness. If you don't have any kind of a reputation. I mean, your word of mouth is your word of mouth, but I know I have that conversation all the time. To me, that only goes so far. Your friend, only a certain amount of your friends' friends have the right kind of business that you can keep generating. You have to create your own interest and your own intent. That was one of the bullet points I read on your website about, your friends and family round of people paying you has kind of dried up. Where do you go? What do you do? Right. I think it's a super important conversation that I think people don't have.
Completely. And I work with a lot of CEOs that are super proud of their network, and be proud of your network because it's been decades in the making, but eventually that's going to dry up unless you're just the most, social butterfly networker in the world. Eventually it's going to dry up. And what happens then? Are you just going to like give up on generating income or revenue for the business? Of course not. There needs to be a bit more of a proactive way. And the thing is, in the world, there's 7.5 billion people. Obviously, not all of them are going to be customers, but there sure are a whole lot of people that you don't know that could buy your stuff, and they're the right fit. So why would we just leave them alone? And I think especially in these times, maybe we get nervous about, do I want to proactively sell and proactively market during like a pandemic? People always ask me that, but to that I say, if anything, they need you now more than before. They need you now more than ever, because if anything, whatever they were struggling with in the past, they're now struggling with even more because of the situation. So you almost owe it to them to proactively go and tell them like, hey, there's a better way to do things. Hey, there's a way that you can actually improve your lifestyle, improve your business. That's the way that I think about it, because like, especially in my line of work where I help people with client acquisition, I know businesses out there are struggling with that now more than they were before. So I feel like I owe it to them to proactively reach out and be like, hey, I understand where you're coming from. You totally can get past this. So yeah, I think as entrepreneurs, take ownership and don't be afraid of going and talking to strangers, because I think a lot of them will be very appreciative that you came and gave them a hand. Because that's what we do as entrepreneurs. We help people, right? That's the idea. So yeah.
Absolutely. So I'd love to get your kind of thoughts and opinions. I know, I was having this conversation with someone I just started an engagement with, and they're saying, I feel like over the next couple of months, with people stuck at home, with people who've been in corporate jobs, who've been in companies for a certain amount of time, I think now spending time with their family and getting a sense of like, wait, I don't want to commute an hour from Oakville to Toronto every day and waste all this time in my life doing it. Like, I think I want to get into the consulting or get into the advisory kind of role. What would you say would be your kind of top advice for someone who's like trying to think about that change, who's kind of like almost on who's almost ready to go? Like, what would be your top advice for someone who's thinking about getting this kind of thing started?
Yeah. So I can only say what helped me back when I began my consultancy, but I would say I felt safe because I had enough savings. And this is a little bit of a strange answer, because people often want to say just like, oh, just do it, follow your dreams or whatnot, not really discounting that. But I would say for me, like, I had a safety net of knowing that I had a certain number in the bank that was going to last me a while. And if you're doing it, at least keep yourself safe, and don't also have like the panic of, can I feed myself? Because the panic of, can I build a good business, is already pretty intense. Like, you don't want to have additional stresses of, damn, like, I don't know if I can afford rent, or I don't know if I can pay the bills. Give yourself like at least a year where, if it does just burn up and it doesn't work out, at least you have that full year of really trying to make it work before you pretty much have to get another job. Right? Give yourself the space to survive effectively. That was important. And then I would say a second thing is also be patient, in the sense that I think the first 6 months of even figuring out what the business is, that's the hardest part of the business. Like, I always talk about getting from like $0 to $10,000 per month. That's harder than getting from like $10,000 to $100,000 a month, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Because like when you're already working with an offering that people like, and you have happy customers, and you understand what channels can get you more customers, and you understand how much it costs you to get customers, then really it's just like doing more of the same until you eventually get to this like larger capacity. And I know I'm simplifying it. I'm making it sound like so much easier than it probably actually is. But I really do stand by the fact that if you have a business that works really well on a small level, to make it work on a big level is like relatively easy-ish. But to take nothing and turn it into something, that's hard. Because when you're at zero, you have nothing. You don't have a business idea. You don't have any fans or followers. You don't have an offering that is going to add any value. You're probably way more stressed about your savings and your income, because zero is zero, and that's not going to help anyone. There's just so much that you need to figure out to get from even 0 to 10, that if you do get through that process to figure out product market fit, getting from 10 to 100 actually is not that hard. So I would say, if you're really struggling because you can't get any customers in the first couple months, and if 6 or 7 months in you still don't feel as though your offering is good, understand that's normal. Understand that this is like a long-term game, that there are people who go years without getting product market fit, that it does take that long, and that if you aren't able to get success within the first 6 months, that it's not because you're an idiot, and it's not that you're a bad entrepreneur that's not cut out for the game. It's just that the process of getting early traction is the most painful part of building a business. If you are pretty much entering this game with that expectation, and you know how hard it's going to be, but you're also following the process of getting product market fit, which I'm more than happy to talk about, then eventually you'll get there, and then success exponentially goes up, right? And that's the one thing that I would say people should think about when they are really comparing between working for someone else versus working for themselves. If you're working for someone else, you would be happy with getting like a 5% raise every year. Whereas as an entrepreneur, when you have full control over your business, like you might be stringing in together months 0K, 3K, 4K, 1K, 2K, the first couple months that you're working on your business. And then it might shoot up to 15, 25, 45. And the curve is exponential and you get to own pretty much all of it. That's really the power. But then like the upfront pain that you're needing to go through is like so much more than obviously just working at a job. So I would say, yeah, like be aware of that heading into it. Be aware that the first half year or so is going to really suck. But once you get through it, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, depending on the type of person, like I, for example, when I quit my corporate job, I was just like so fed up. I was like, I don't care. I'm doing it anyway. And that I was in the pressure cooker right away of like, holy shit, I need revenue now. And so, it forces you to make shittier decisions or take on contracts that are going to suck or that you're going to dread. Just so it makes you take not shittier actions, but just less desirable actions that may not be driving towards your future success. So yeah, that's a great piece of advice for sure.
Yeah. Like I planned ahead. When I began my business, I had already been thinking about it for a couple months. And I was also in a situation where I didn't love what I was doing, but I also knew that like I'm in this for the long term. So let's make sure that I have enough savings so that I can do this properly and not have to like do it and then be on this insane time, on this like insane clock where if I didn't get success in 2 or 3 months, I had to go back and get another job. Like I knew that would be the case if I didn't prepare. So like I had like 25, 35 grand that I was like ready to burn through. Mm-hmm. If that was gone, then obviously I would have had to go back.
Sure,
but
that makes sense.
It gave me enough of a runway to not have to feel like, man, it's like that I was like really, really nervous about the situation.
For sure. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned that you would be happy to jump in. I'd love to hear your thoughts on product market fit. If you've got some some kind of ABCs or some takeaways that people can think about.
Yeah. So this is going to actually link in with everything that I had talked about up until this point. The thing about the first 6 months being really annoying and challenging, but also even maybe like 10, 15 minutes ago, we were talking about why Outbound makes sense for an early stage business owner. Well, first of all, understand that if you are just starting out, you don't have product market fit, you don't have any customers, you don't have a website, you don't have an offering which people like yet, you definitely can't really do any type of marketing except outbound. Because once again, content implies that you know your audience and know what problems you can solve are. You probably don't know that yet before product market fit. Definitely can't do paid acquisition because where's the money? You're barely able to put food on the table as is. You're probably rationing. So paid acquisition is like out of the table, off the table. Partnerships, for example, like podcasting, no one's going to want to partner with you if you have no reputation. Like if you do, I bet the person who's partnering with you also doesn't have much of like a following. So it doesn't end up being very helpful. So you're talking about like a lot of the channels that people normally rely on, content, paid, and partnerships, those are like just off the table. So what's left? Pretty much outbound. But this is good because as an early stage entrepreneur, outbound is cheap. Outbound fits everything that you want to do. But also the cool thing about outbound is that it is like the easiest and fastest route to getting someone on the phone with you. And that's what you really want in the beginning, because before you even invest time to come up with this offering or building a program or plan or software or whatever, you want to just talk to a lot of the people that you are in theory selling to and just have them tell you if this idea would even solve a problem. Because the worst mistake that you can make as an early stage business owner is spending like a year and hundreds of thousands of dollars building this thing that actually no one wants. And I've seen this happen many times where a CEO will just lock themselves in a basement and build this thing. And then they'll be super proud of it and they'll go out in the market once it's done and they'll talk to people to show it to them and no one cares. We could have avoided this situation if we just talked to the people first, right? Like here's this mock-up of what I want to build. Here are the problems that I'm trying to solve. Here's what I think pricing could be. And if they're excited when you hear, or when they hear your prototype or even just vision of what you're doing, if they think like, damn, I am going through that problem. Yes, like I need this thing fixed. I've been actually thinking about fixing this forever, but I don't know how to fix it. If you could fix it for me, that'd be so cool. Like if you're not getting that type of response relatively consistently, if it's super lukewarm or people are like, you know what, doesn't seem like that big of a deal. I don't really, like it would kind of help, but I don't think I would spend money on it. That's not a response you want. You don't want to build a product around fixing a problem that gets that type of response. So that's why in the beginning, Outbound is great because it'll get you direct to the audience that you're trying to serve. And it'll allow you to validate whether or not your idea, your business model, the problems that you're trying to solve for are even worth solving for. Yeah. Right? So in the beginning, Outbound is great for that, whether it be on LinkedIn or email or just cold calling. And if you have enough feedback from these people saying like, yeah, if you could fix this, I'd pay you money. Let's do it. Then you can start thinking about, okay, what's the version 1 of what I can build that can serve these people? Like, what's the biggest problem that they have? What can I do to fix it? And how do I get this thing out there in like a relatively quick way? It doesn't need to be perfect. Your version 1 can be pretty hacky and janky. They don't really expect you to build a perfect thing because you already had a conversation which implied that you're just starting out. So no one's going to ever force you to be like, oh, I want you to give me like the Tesla Roadster. Like that wasn't the first Tesla, I don't think. So yeah, you go and you build that V1 and then you go back to those same people and you'd be like, hey, can you check this out? Can you try this out? Can you become like a paid beta user? Obviously, those people, they're your first mover. So you can't really expect them to be paying like full price or anything. But their ongoing feedback is worth more than money. And their early customer testimonials are definitely worth more than money. And you can still charge them, obviously. Like I wouldn't say just take on free customers for the sake of their feedback, but I would say if push comes to shove and the only way you can bring them on is to give them discounts or say like, hey, you know what, if this thing doesn't work out, I'll give you your money back. Those are the things that you have to do because in the beginning, you just have to get super scrappy with client acquisition. Be willing to do things that you might not be willing to do as $1 million company. But like if you can prove out that use case and build out that version 1 of your offering and just like somehow scratch and claw a couple paid users into it, then their feedback and their customer testimonials will then make it way easier for you to get more customers, which will then give you more revenue, which will then allow you more resources to make the product better. And obviously you're still getting feedback from them because that's kind of the relationship you've built. So the product will not only get better because you have the money to make it better, but you also have the information from the users as to how to make it better. And then eventually you have a ton of customers, you have a ton of case studies, you have an offering which is consistently loved by your audience. And this is when you can start doing things like content marketing or partnerships or paid acquisition because you have the resources and you understand your audience enough to do those things, right? So if we talk about product market fit, if we talk about the channels at work, like it all kind of bleeds in together. And the reason why I said 6 months, if you do it the right way, is because oftentimes to get from nothing to a place where you have a couple beta users that are kind of like happy with your offering and are paying you, that's like typically 6 months. And that process of getting from nothing to that point where it's like, I kind of have something, it really sucks because it's so hard to do and it feels so slow. But man, once you get your like 3rd or 4th customer and they're paying and they're somewhat happy, it doesn't need to be perfect, but they're somewhat happy, like everything just exponentially gets easier from there. So that's why I said everything kind of links back together.
Yeah. Yeah, that was super insightful. And I think a lot of people have this grand vision of this is what it's going to be, and it's going to be quick and it's going to be easy. And I think especially people coming from working in a corporate job, it's like you came into a business that already went through the pain points, so you only saw it in its finished state. Yeah. And it's polished. You saw it when it was ready, so your vision of it's like, oh, I can just replicate this over here by myself. And it's like, no, you didn't go through you're right, like the 6 months or the 1 year of crippling just people like rejecting you. This is stupid. I wouldn't pay for that. But all those things end up leading towards what the product should actually be if you're good enough at iterating.
Yeah. And something that I didn't talk about is that in the process of getting all that positive affirmation and feedback and paying customers, you're going to get like 10 no's for every yes, which is why those first 6 months suck. Because you're going to reach out to a ton of people on whatever channel you choose, and you're going to barely get any responses. And then when you do get responses and you give them your idea, maybe they don't like it. And then you talk to 20 people and only one person likes your idea. So you realize like, oh, man, I got to go back to the drawing board. You take your initial idea and you change it a little bit. Maybe you change the offer, or you change the problem that you're solving for, or you change the audience, and you almost have to like go back and do the entire thing again. You go and talk to more people, and if they don't like it, then you have to do the same thing. You have to rinse and repeat, go back to the drawing board. And maybe after like 3 or 4 revisions of just like total rejection, you go out and you finally get an inkling of a couple of people liking it. And they're like, you might be onto something there. So you build the thing for them, but then they don't like the thing that you built. So now you're like, man, you know what? I think I have a problem that I can solve that people want, but the offer sucks. So now you have to like get the offer to a place that people are happy about it. And maybe that takes like another 3 or 4 revisions and another 3 or 4 months. And then like 7 or 8 months down the line, people are finally like, you know what? You have a product that I like, and it's solving a problem that I need to have solved. I'm more than happy to pay you. I'm more than happy to have a customer testimonial. This is great. So that's like 95% rejection and 95% changing things that weren't working. And that's like your first 6 months to a year. Yeah. So, but like I said, that entire process to get to a place that you do have an offering that people want, and that you do know how to get in contact with these people, and that you're legitimately solving a problem to a point where they're happy to share what you do to their friends, exponentially easier after that point, and more fun after that point. But yeah, it just like really sucks getting there. So to your earlier question, yeah, if you're wanting to be a new entrepreneur, it doesn't matter if you're a consultant or an agency owner or a SaaS founder. It's like, be willing to just not have not have a lot of positive feedback the first 6 to 12 months, and be okay with that. Know that it's normal. And if you know it's normal, then you'll be good. Yeah.
Got it. Well, that was great. I think the depth of the insights and a lot of things, I think there's a lot of sexiness around entrepreneurship lately. And there's like, do this, start this, become a YouTuber now. And like, I think it's made to look too easy. And I think it messes people up when they get into it and they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And so having these conversations and like opening up the conversation to the fact that it's going to suck for a while and you're not going to make any money and people will tell you you're stupid and people won't like your product. I think it's a great conversation to have because it's realistic and it's the truth, and it'll get people into the right headspace. Because I think if you don't have that, you see the Instagram posts and you read the LinkedIn articles about all the great things that are happening, and then it doesn't work for you and you're 2 months in, you think it's over. And that's really just where you're actually at where you should be. So it's a great conversation to have, and I appreciate you kind of diving deep into it.
Yeah, like don't think it's your fault that you don't have that Instagram lifestyle that everyone else has. Like that's like rare, I would say. Most people don't live that lifestyle, even if they are successful entrepreneurs. Because I mean, once you make it, it's hard to maintain. Like talk to any bodybuilder or whatnot. Like sure, getting there was hard, but maintaining it just as hard. So It's not as though you really get to ease your foot off the gas pedal unless you are okay with just like no longer really growing, which is cool too. I think at a certain like growth threshold, maybe you do get enjoyment out of just like chilling and running business as is and continuing to pursue aggressive growth. But like it's hard to maintain entrepreneurship. It's hard to even get that success in the beginning. And like I don't know if this is like a morbid perspective to have, but I always expect nothing. I expect, like, for example, we're in Corona right now. People are saying, oh yeah, we're going to have business going back to normal in May. Like for me, I'm thinking that things are going to last throughout like the summer into the fall, potentially into early winter. And because I think that is probably going to be that bad, I'm never going to be let down. I mean, unless it goes into like next year, then I'm going to be pretty rattled.
Right.
But a lot of people who are thinking this thing's going to be done in May, when it doesn't end in May, they're going to be like, oh man, and they're going to be so let down. So expect that it's going to kind of suck. Expect that it's potentially going to be incredibly hard. And then if you have that expectation, then you'll be a little bit more realistic, I think, in terms of what you need to brace for, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
For entrepreneurship, be willing to brace for long hours and a lot of frustration. But then on the other side, if we get to be optimistic for once or positive for once, like you truly do get to control your own destiny, financially, your lifestyle. If you put in the effort and you actually can add value to the world, like there's really nothing more fulfilling and freeing than running your own business, I don't think. Yeah.
Love it, man. That was like the perfect way to end it. It's like, and by the way, all this is going to suck, but no, that's great. Super insightful, man. I really appreciate you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can check out my Facebook group, which has a ton of founders and entrepreneurs, and we're always sharing ideas and giving each other advice and just inspiration and motivation. So I'll put that into the show notes. You can also find me on my website, of course, which you can check out more of my content. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I can also include my LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and you can connect with me there. Just let me know that you checked out this specific podcast, and that way I will accept you. Definitely put a note in, because if you're one of those people that don't put a note in the LinkedIn connection, I will not accept. Advice to anyone who's using LinkedIn for outreach: please put notes into your outreach.
Awesome, man. All right, thanks so much.
Yeah. Cheers, man. I'm really happy that you invited me on.
Thanks. All right.